Characters with expressive faces, powerful close-ups, and a director's poetic use of water. Mufasa the Lion King may be putting up big numbers at the box office, but there's so much in the film you might have missed. In the first few minutes of Mufasa, we watch Simba and Nala welcome their first child, Kiara. Then there's a time jump in which Simba and Nala leave to have their second child. As a result, Kiara takes shelter in a cave while being cared for by Timon, Pumbaa, and Rafiki. Before Rafiki arrives, Timon and Pumbaa entertain Kiara with the story of how they supposedly fought and killed Scar. They even recreate the climactic battle between Simba and Scar at the end of The Lion King, but with the meerkat and the warthog subbing in for Simba. You may not have paid attention to it, but that throwaway comedic moment is actually a flagrant instance of trailer bait and switch. The shot of Timon and Pumbaa pushing a lion off a cliff appears in the trailer, completely without context, from an angle that doesn't allow you to see who the lion is. It seemed to give the impression that Timon and Pumbaa would somehow be involved in a few of the movie's action sequences. However, the scene turns out to be nothing more than one of their tall tales.
So just to be clear, we're not in this story?
The most iconic location and visual in The Lion King is undoubtedly Pride Rock. Several of the film's key scenes take place on the edge of the platform-like peak, including Simba reclaiming his post as king. This is true of both the original 1994 film and the 2019 remake. So while watching Mufasa, you might just assume that the cave where Kiara and her caretakers shelter from the storm is the Pride Rock Cave. Take a closer look, however, and you'll notice that it is not. As we can see in the shots that show the cave from the outside, it's merely another cave somewhere in the Pride Lands. This makes a lot of sense because if the intent is to keep the royal child safe, it's probably a better idea to hide her somewhere less conspicuous than the official royal residence. One of the most common criticisms of the 2019 remake of The Lion King was that the animal characters lacked discernible facial expressions, making their emotions unreadable.
Now that's what I call umami.
However, in Mufasa the Lion King, the problem of animals' facial expressions was addressed. The animation in the film allows the characters to express their feelings through their faces. So, for instance, the lions are able to smile widely, move their brows, and even contort their mouths in a human-like way. It's a relatively small and subtle change in terms of the film's overall look, but it contributes to making the story of Mufasa and Taka more relatable and emotionally affecting. Mufasa may tell the story of how he overcame self-doubt to become a great leader, but the character who goes through the most dramatic arc in the film is Taka. Although Taka's turn to evil is prompted by the betrayal he feels upon learning of Mufasa and Sarabi's love for each other, the movie indicates that he actually resented Mufasa for a long time. He even frames his rescue of Mufasa from the river as a life-changing decision that he made entirely for Mufasa's benefit, and one that he might not have even made at all. But Taka's very first appearance in the film shows that he's already got his eyes fully trained on Mufasa as he walks towards the river. Although Taka is there to fetch water, Mufasa immediately catches his attention. In other words, Taka's lifelong belief that he was duped into saving Mufasa is more of a self-delusion. In reality, it was a very willful and deliberate choice on Taka's part. The very concept of a Lion King as the patriarchal leader of his pride is a bit of an iffy one, as lions' typical social structure is actually closer to a matriarchy. Lioness hunt and care for cubs, while the social role of males is usually limited to mating and pride defense. They also spend most of any given day sleeping and resting. That said, you don't see much of that organization in Mufasa's pride in the original animated film. Mufasa, however, features a much more realistic pride in Obasi and Eshe's group, which indeed consists of lionesses as hunters. Meanwhile, King Obasi mostly just sleeps. The movie even comically points out how little his role as king actually amounts to. An early, defining event in Mufasa's life is the river flood that sweeps him away and separates him from his parents. Following that trauma, Mufasa develops an immense fear of swimming and of large water bodies in general.
But if we swim, we drown!
But there's an even subtler reason why he's so resistant to water aside from just trauma. The reason is that Mufasa's great survival skill lies in his ability to use sounds, smells, and vibrations to take in his environment. That perimeter mapping ability is almost a superpower, which he repeatedly uses in times of danger. And it's much harder, if not outright impossible, for Mufasa to use it while swimming or floating in a river where he's not really able to feel the earth. In the film's most exciting action set piece, Mufasa and a few others find themselves trapped next to an elephant procession while Kiros's pride encroaches on them. It's then that Sarabi decides to drop a beehive in the middle of the elephants to provoke a stampede. In the ensuing chaos, Sarabi gets knocked unconscious by an elephant, so Mufasa drags her under a rock to keep her safe. Taka, meanwhile, finds himself stranded and alone in the middle of the stampede and must hide underneath a rock to stay alive. He's visibly terrified as he watches the elephants run right above him. Upon closer inspection, however, the panic on his face is clearly the result of a trauma that stayed with Taka and may have had something to do with his decision to later kill Mufasa by new stampede. One of the key components of Taka's character arc is his sense of guilt and shame over what he perceives as his own cowardice. He particularly beats himself up for not jumping into action to protect his mother from Kiros's goons when they pounce on her and Mufasa. Taka retains his tendency to be fearful and avoid direct brush-ups with danger throughout the movie, but it's later recontextualized as not a bad thing. After all, being reluctant to fight and looking for alternatives can sometimes be useful. For one, it saves both Taka and Mufasa when they're cornered by Kiros's pride on the edge of a waterfall. If it were up to Mufasa, after all, they would have foolishly taken on the whole pride and inevitably been killed. That said, the real problem plaguing Taka is not fearfulness, it's the crippling shame he feels due to the pressure put on him by his father. Early on in the film, Mufasa's parents sing him a sweet, hopeful song about Milele, the earthly paradise they hope to one day reach if they can get across the desert. Mufasa spends the rest of his life dreaming of Milele and eventually sets upon finding it with Rafiki's help. As promised by Mufasa's parents, Milele does turn out to be a prosperous land full of water, grass, and life. It's called the Pride Lands.
Find your place in the circle of life.
Geographically speaking, however, the Pride Lands don't quite match up with the magical land Mufasa and his parents dream of. They look more like a typical East African savanna, but not unlike several other areas previously visited by the characters. So what really makes Milele so exuberant is not the geography or the plant life, but the various animal populations that have migrated to it from all over and made it a rich, bustling ecosystem. It's not all that shocking for director Barry Jenkins to have chosen to tackle a remake, seeing as he's always been vocal about his love of artistically ambitious blockbusters like Black Panther: Wakanda Forever. So beneath all the CGI wizardry, Jenkins' distinctive directing style is still very much in Mufasa, particularly in his trademark use of close-ups. You might not have taken notice of this visual choice, seeing as the faces being spotlighted aren't human, but it shows up a number of times throughout the movie. And in addition to putting an unmistakable directorial stamp on the film, it's also a choice that speaks to Jenkins' trust in the animators to make the characters' faces more emotive.
I love how beautiful it is. You walk on a set, and you just have no idea. It's why I don't storyboard, It's all possible.
The close-ups aren't the only recognizable Barry Jenkins touch in Mufasa either. Another Jenkins-esque motif that recurs throughout the movie are large bodies of water and the protagonist's immersion into them.
Barry's incredibly talented and really try to do something different.
In the film, Mufasa plunges into water at two heavily symbolic points. First, during the flood that separates him from his parents, he finds himself deep underwater and must gather the strength to swim to the surface. The scene signals that he has become responsible for himself and his own life. Then, towards the end of the film, he fights Kiros in an underground lake and once again swims to the surface. This scene symbolizes Mufasa's rebirth as a capable king and pride leader. Both these sequences are highly evocative of a scene in Jenkins' Oscar-winning 2016 drama Moonlight. In the scene, Wong brings young Chiron into the sea and patiently teaches him to swim. It's a transformative moment that sees Chiron begin to find his place in the world and learn to fend for himself. The scene also shows him what it's like to be loved and cared for by a parental figure. As a family-friendly Disney movie, Mufasa may not have quite the same depth and existential heft as Moonlight, but it shows that Jenkins is still quite fond of using water and swimming scenes as signifiers of existential reckoning.